Hello, my name is Lindsay, and today I'm going to tell you about all the new movies I watched this October. Every year, for as long as I can remember, I've compiled a watch list of films to watch for the month of Halloween, and it's a lot of fun and something to look forward to every year. This year, I actually watched 20 new films that I had never seen before, and they all fall somewhere on the horror spectrum. So today I'm going to briefly talk about these films in the order that I watched them in while trying to avoid any essential spoilers. So if this interests you, stay tuned. The first movie I watched was Mayhem, 2017. This is a horror comedy thriller directed by Joe Lynch, starring Stephen Young and Samara Weaving. In this film, an office building is basically put on lockdown during a viral outbreak. The virus, which is referred to as red eye, basically triggers severe emotions in those that are infected, and it raises stress levels. So basically, in this workplace, which is already full of drama and hostility, is worsened. Chaos ensues everywhere as people begin to unravel and act out on their impulses. I thought this film was extremely witty, creative, and entertaining throughout the whole thing, and the actors were great at lowering their inhibitions, which I know is not so easy. Definitely recommend. Next up was Re-Animator, 1985. This is a well-known horror comedy about a tenacious young scientist conducting experiments on the dead. It was directed by Stuart Gordon and loosely based on the H.P. Lovecraft story Herbert West Re-Animator, which I actually have never read it. But this movie was pretty hilarious and bizarre, outrageous, gory, and definitely not to be taken so seriously. My mom actually watched this with me, and she kept saying, "Seriously?" No, not seriously, Mom. This film is actually a cult classic among fans of horror, so I'm really glad to have finally seen it. Next up is Phenomena, 1985, a horror film directed by Dario Argento and stars a young Jennifer Connelly. Donald Pleasence is also in this, as well as a very cute chimpanzee. This film was on my watch list for the longest time and is by far one of my new favorites. It is set in and around a Switzerland boarding school, and the main character, Jennifer, played by Jennifer Connelly, has the ability to communicate with insects, so she puts her powers to use in an attempt to track down a serial killer. This storyline is truly fascinating to me and concrete. I really loved the character of Jennifer. She's self-assured, introspective, and clever, and the visuals were great, as they usually are in Argento films. I enjoyed the music a lot, which was a mix of like synth and metal. Overall, I would highly recommend watching this film. The next movie on the list was Host 2020, a found footage horror film directed by Rob Savage. It features a group of friends holding an online seance in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak. This is actually the first film I believe I've seen to address the pandemic. Um, as to be expected, the seance takes a terrible turn, and the people on the Zoom call start to experience very unusual things. This film was rather short, about the length of a typical Zoom call, and I think this was purposely done to make it feel even more real. Um, Overall, I think it was a very chilling film, and I thought the pacing was just right. Kind of like a nice like crescendo of horror. Um, I do wish that the scary parts in this film were a little bit more scary, but that is just personal preference. I think for many people, this film was probably very scary, and for others, not so much, like me. So it just depends on the person. But overall, I thought this was a great film and definitely a must see. Next up is Season of the Witch, 1973, a George A. Romero film originally released under the title Hungry Wives. I wouldn't call this a horror, but more along the lines of a drama. There are creepy elements such as like nightmare sequences and spell casting. This movie is about a lonely housewife who starts practicing magic after she meets a local witch and becomes very intrigued. I actually read that the feminist movement was very influential to the script. Romero addresses gender roles in this film. The female protagonist finds comfort in the things that interests her, and she goes after them. Things that she desires that bring out this sort of inner power. I wouldn't say this is a must-see film, but it is definitely unique and strange, and it will probably leave an impression. Next film on the list was Train to Busan, 2016, a South Korean horror film directed by Yong Sang-ho. It is an action-packed zombie film that takes place for the most part on a train headed for Busan. This film was like the talk of the town when it came out, and I'm so excited to have finally seen it because I really did love it. Um, I just never got around to watching it, but the pacing was excellent in this film. It was heartfelt and riveting, and the acting was amazing. I felt slightly melancholy after watching it because it was so powerful, in my opinion. The next movie on the list was Body Bags, 1993, an anthological horror film directed by John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper. This was a fun watch compiled of some great performances, scares, laughs, and music by John Carpenter. It features three short horror tales, the first one set in Haddonfield during a young woman's night shift at a gas station. You may actually know Haddonfield as the fictional town from the Halloween movie series. A serial killer is on the loose, and things get very spooky in this one. The second tale is more comedic, and it is about a man trying to find ways to thicken his thinning hair. He eventually gets a special treatment done, but as to be expected, it doesn't go as planned. Um, the side effects are pretty terrible and nasty. I had several laugh out loud moments during this one. It was pretty hilarious in my opinion, especially the scene where he sees his new hair in the mirror, and I must have replayed it like 5 times. Do you ever do that? Like when you see a funny scene in a movie or a TV show, you just have to like rewind it over and over and laugh until you can't laugh any longer? The third tale in the anthology is about a baseball player that loses his eye in a car accident. He decides to get a transplant from a donor, but he then starts to experience strange visions and violent outbursts. I won't give away any more than that, but I really enjoyed everything about this anthology. Um, the storylines, the comedy, the scares, and especially all the cameos from people like Wes Craven, John Carpenter, Sam Raimi, and even more. This had a lot of like creep show slash Tales from the Crypt vibes. The next film on this list is Blood Quantum, 2019, a Canadian horror film directed by Jeff Barnaby. This is another zombie feature. As a result of a viral outbreak, the world's population is wiped out, with the exception of the native people of Red Crow. They set up their own little safe haven with walls and bring in their survivors that they can find. But as to be expected, aside from the zombies, there are evil characters that pose a threat to the survivors. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good film, with the exception of some underdeveloped dialogue and maybe a couple unbelievable acting performances. However, there was a lot of action and gore, which fans of the zombie genre will approve of. And I also enjoyed the soundtrack. I thought there was a lot of thought put into the soundtrack, as well as the character dynamics and the choices they make. Next was Sinister, 2012, a supernatural horror film directed by Scott Derrickson starring Ethan Hawke. This film is about a true crime writer, and he basically moves his family into a new home and finds these mysterious videotapes in the attic, and it's about him unraveling the mystery behind the very disturbing footage on the tapes. This film scared me, unlike most of the others on this list. The visuals were great, and I found it to be extremely unnerving, suspenseful, and triggering to my inner fears. To top it off, the score was very visceral and eerie, and so if you haven't seen this film, I would definitely recommend it, but just be sure to hug your loved ones afterwards. And now for the second Dario Argento horror film on my list, Inferno, 1980. This is the second film in the Three Mothers trilogy and the follow-up to Suspiria, one of my all-time favorites. This film is about the mysterious deaths of young women who come to be aware of the story of the three mothers. The story of the three mothers is about three witches: Mater Suspiriorum, the mother of sighs, seen in Suspiria; Mater Tenebrarum, the mother of darkness, seen here in Inferno; and Mater Lacrimarum, the mother of tears, seen in the Mother of Tears. Although that Suspiria was released first, I don't think it would be a horrible idea to watch Inferno first, because the opening of the film is actually an introduction to the Three Mothers story. I enjoy this film a lot. The first scene is actually regarded as a masterpiece. I won't really describe it, so I'll let you watch it for yourselves. The whole film, not a surprise, is very visually stunning, with good death scenes and the ever-presence of magic and witchcraft. I always just love the atmosphere of Argento films. The next film up is What We Do in the Shadows, 2014. This is a New Zealand horror comedy shot in the style of a mockumentary, directed by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. This film focuses on the lives of a group of vampires living in a flat together, leading up to an event called the Unholy Masquerade. It's sort of like a secret societal event, a gathering for vampires, werewolves, zombies. The oldest member of this group of vampires in the film is about 8,000 years old, I believe, and the youngest is like a couple months old, and he definitely stirs up some trouble. 4 of the 5 vampires live in a flat together. This film pretty much had me laughing right away. I thought it is very brilliant, set in modern day, and the way that they mixed in ancient vampire lore with just random human things that resonate, like when they have a roommate meeting and are arguing about the dirty dishes, or when they befriend a human and he shows them how to watch a sunrise on YouTube. Yeah, a television show based on this movie actually came out. I believe it was last year. And I haven't had a chance to check that out yet, but I definitely plan to. Next up is I See You, 2019, a film directed by Adam Randall. I went into this movie completely blind, and I thought it was a supernatural film, but I was wrong. It's actually a crime drama thriller, and it's about a detective and his family that start to experience strange occurrences after a boy goes missing in town. The way this mystery unfolds is done rather cleverly, and although I had several hunches in regards to the direction of the plot, I was unable to predict the ending, which was pretty amazing. My family and I were basically left with our jaws on the floor after this was over. Definitely a must see thriller. Next up was Little Monsters 2019, an Australian American horror action comedy directed by Abe Forsyth and starring Lupita Nyong'o and Alexander England. In this film, a group of zombies invade a farm where a group of school children are taking a field trip. However, the zombies in this film are not the main focus. The story is more so about an uncle, his nephew, and the nephew's kindergarten teacher. Lupita has such a screen presence, in my opinion. This film has elements of a romantic comedy. It's very comical, sweet, and a little bit campy. To be honest, it did not entirely hold my attention in the middle section, but it did not drag on and the pacing got better. So, overall, I think this film will definitely leave an impression on you and make you smile, and it's different from other zombie films that can be like rather depressing. Next is Overlord 2018, an action horror film directed by Julius Avery. I went into this blind with the exception of reading a short synopsis, so I did not know what to expect at all. It's set on the eve of D-Day in World War II. A group of American soldiers come across like a town that has been invaded by Nazis, and they stumble on sort of like an underground lab where there are very unusual experiments being conducted on soldiers and civilians. Um, some people would consider this a zombie film, but I would say not so much. It's more along the lines of a science fiction war movie. It actually feels a little bit like a mix of Inglorious Bastards with Alien. That's not 100% accurate, but I hope that makes sense. The undead humans in this film are more like super soldiers, with like crazy strength and aggression. So I don't know. It was very thrilling and full of action and suspense. So I would definitely recommend it, but don't go into it thinking it's like going to be like a horror film. Next on the list, Gretel and Hansel, 2020, a horror film directed by Oz Perkins. In this adaptation of the famous tale, Gretel and Hansel are taken in by a witch after they are kicked out of their house. At first, the witch is very welcoming and sweet. She feeds them in abundance and lets them stay at her place. But soon enough, things start to take an unsettling turn, and the witch's true colors and true backstory are revealed. Um, in this film, Gretel and the witch have similar gifts, and the witch tries to manipulate Gretel's mind in an attempt to get her to embrace her powers. So I thought this was very interesting, and ultimately, this film is about Gretel and her own fate and her inner power. This film was very well casted, in my opinion, especially the part of Hulda, the old witch. She really creeped me out. Next on the list is one of my new favorite films, Pan's Labyrinth, 2006, a Spanish-Mexican dark fantasy drama by Guillermo del Toro set in Spain during 1944. It is about a young girl who finds herself trying to navigate two separate worlds. One is a magical world full of creatures and enchanted trials. The other is a brutal one comprised of turmoil and war. I really love this movie. It was very enchanting and dark and powerful. From the visuals to the strange creatures to the music and the performances. It was also extremely contemplative and thought-provoking. Guillermo del Toro actually said that this film is in large part about choices, and I can see that. I thought it was very brilliant and poetic. Next up is Hereditary 2018, an A24 supernatural horror drama directed by Ari Aster, starring Toni Collette and Alex Wolff. This is not your typical horror movie, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I've watched it. Um, this film is about loss, grief, family tensions, and the ominous aftermath of death within a family. This film is known to have a lasting impression on those who have watched it, and I can see why now. Like Midsummer, another well-known Ari Aster film, it is strange, disturbing, visceral, and extremely tense. In my opinion, this is a truly unique and incredible piece of cinema. But unfortunately, I don't think I can watch this a second time just because it was traumatizing for me to the point where I almost turned it off about like 40 minutes in. But I thought everything about it was truly brilliant, and the ending just had me floored. So I definitely recommend watching this if you haven't seen it already and if you're like a horror aficionado. Next on the list is Pontypool, 2008, a Canadian horror film directed by Bruce McDonald. This is about a radio station in the town of Pontypool under quarantine amid a viral outbreak. This is a very unique addition to the zombie genre because the virus is actually transmitted through the English language. Specific words can result in infection, so not talking is crucial to survival. At first, the characters are pretty terrible at being quiet, which is frustrating. Um, I wouldn't say this is a scary movie in my opinion. There is a lot left to the imagination, and there is not a lot of action at all. Um, but it is a very original idea and very interesting. Worth the watch indeed. Next up was 30 Days of Night, 2007, a vampire horror film directed by David Slade, starring Josh Hartnett and Melissa George. This film is set in an Alaskan town where 30 days out of the year it is completely dark. So basically, a group of vampires show up and begin to feast on the town without having to worry about the sun. The vampires in this film speak in a foreign language, they have the blackest eyes, and an entire mouthful of sharp teeth. They growl and shriek and move about like animals, and I really love when vampires are shown like this in films. I think it's a lot scarier. Um, I did, however, want more like of a backstory on the vampires, but now that I think about it, I guess there is something also compelling about not knowing, sort of like the mystery. They're just these mysterious killing machines. One thing that I will always remember about this film is sort of like the last shot, which I won't give away, but it is very beautiful and shocking. And the last but not least, the 20th film on this list is The Haunting, 1963, a British horror film directed by Robert Wise, and an adaptation of the Haunting of Hill House novel by Shirley Jackson. This was, in my opinion, a very loyal adaptation, and I actually read the novel last year, so I was very much looking forward to watching the film finally. I thought it was very good. However, at times I did find difficulty staying invested, only because I knew the outcome of the story, and sometimes Eleanor's hysterics and whining were a slightly irritating, but I know the point is to show how she is more susceptible to the house and its power. So, yeah, I understand how that plays into everything. I think this was probably scarier when it first came out, but not so much in modern times. Regardless, it was a good movie, and I think the story is timeless, so definitely check it out because it's a classic. Those are all the films that I watched this October. My favorites on the list would have to be Phenomena, Pan's Labyrinth, Train to Busan, and Body Bags. Definitely let me know your thoughts on any of these films in the comments below. And if you have any film recommendations, please let me know because I'm always looking for new movies to watch. Thank you so much if you're still watching and for sticking around. I hope to see you next time and have a wonderful day.